Hello everyone and welcome back. America's status as the world's lone superpower is rapidly fading. Other nations and groups of nations are angling to fill the void. Take Russia and China. Earlier this year, the U.S. Air Force Chief of Staff said that if they stay on track, Russia and China will be fielding capability in the next 3 to 5 years that's better than what the United States currently has in many areas. He said the fighter aircraft that they're going to field over these next few years just have better capability than things we currently have sitting on the ramp. Today we're going to talk about the astonishing rise of Russia and China, and we'll look at their rapidly forming military alliance. These developments all play a huge role in events prophesied in your Bible. Have you noticed the emerging power block coming from the East, or the kings of the East, as it's called in Bible prophecy? Recently I reread this wonderful little booklet, Russia and China in Prophecy, and the last update, the last revision on this booklet was in 2009, so several years ago, but it was amazing to me just how up to date this little booklet is. I hope that you'll request it. We'll give you the information throughout this program in hopes that you'll call or text for your own free copy of this wonderful book that will really help you understand the significance of what we're seeing happen right now in the world. I'm going to refer to an article here in just a moment, a New York Times piece. China updating military strategy puts focus on projecting naval power. That's where its focus is now, in China. It's not just about building up armaments as a defense measure. It's looking to project power. This is the article. You can see the title there at the top. The article itself says, the policy document, it's referring to a document that was released earlier this year, lays out China's military ambitions, a central element of what its leaders call a national rejuvenation, as Beijing moves to counter what it sees as American efforts to contain its rise. It extends beyond naval policy to emphasize the continued modernization of the Chinese military in general. You can see there that it's meant to counter America's efforts to contain its rise. We've talked about this recently on our radio program that airs on KPCG in the United States. You can listen to that over here, actually, by just going to kpcg.fm. That's the live stream. In fact, 7% of the audience of that U.S. radio station comes right here from the UK. So tune in if you want to keep right up to date with what's happening in the world as it's discussed in your Bible. You can follow us on our radio station. You can certainly watch these programs regularly. We also have, as you know, if you've watched us before, quite a lot of material that we really hope that you'll study and dig into. But look at the massive buildup of China's military. Why are they doing this? Why are they projecting their influence out? Well, it's because they see the U.S. in sharp decline, and they're racing to fill the power void. There was a piece in the National Review just last year that just kind of went through step by step all that it's doing to build up its Navy, how that by 2020 it's going to have a substantially larger Navy than the United States. 2020, that's just 5 years from now. As the U.S. reduces the size of its Navy, here comes China. They're adding all kinds of anti-ship missiles, air defense missiles to their Navy, upgrading their nuclear arsenal, adding to its nuclear weapons capabilities, adding missiles that are capable of striking the United States. Why would they want that many missiles with that type of range? They're in the midst of a massive buildup. They already have the world's largest and most lethal inventory of conventional weapons. That's significant. You see a huge buildup in conventional weapons in China and also Russia, even as the United States is completely changing its strategies, focusing more on counterinsurgency and on going after these shadowy networks terrorists and such. And as the United States focuses on that, here are all of these conventional weapons popping up all over the world. Weapons for more traditional wars, nations against nations. We've seen so many of those in history. What about its Air Force? 2,000 capable fighter aircraft in the Chinese Air Force right now. And they're working to modernize. They're working to introduce two new fifth-generation fighters and perhaps a stealth bomber just in the next few years. That's what they're hoping to add. They're upgrading their intelligence, their surveillance, their reconnaissance systems. And of course, you know all about their abilities to attack the United States in cyber warfare. They've had great success in doing this just in the last few years. We'll talk more about that after the break. Let's look over at Ezekiel in chapter 38. Ezekiel 38, a massive, massive cyber attack, stealing millions of documents. We'll talk more about that in a second. Russia, meanwhile, you know they're on the march in Ukraine and elsewhere. This is Ezekiel 38 and verse 1. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog. In prophecy, that refers to Russia. And you can look at some old commentaries from the 1800s, the early 1900s, that were able to identify these names in their modern terminology. Gog, which is Russia, the land of Magog, which has to do with the area around China. It says, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Now, first of all, we should note that these verses begin, or the fulfillment of these prophecies, it's for the latter days. You can see that in verse 8. You can see it in verse 16. I'll leave that to you to study. But you can see from this passage that clearly this is for the latter days. Now, when you look at Russia and China, even the word Meshach there, that's just another name for Moscow. Russia, China, Moscow, and then, as my father pointed out, well over a year now, the really, really interesting phrase here is the chief prince of Meshach, or the chief prince of Moscow. If you look into that word chief, the Hebrew word there is Rosh. That's what it's referring to. The Hebrew word is Rosh. The Prince of Rosh really is the proper meaning. This was discussed back in February of 2014 in the Trumpet magazine. Again, we'd like you to become a subscriber to that magazine as well. But coming back to this prophecy, it's referring to a specific individual. God says, you go and you prophesy against him. Against him. I want to refer you once again to February 2014, that Trumpet magazine, where we had a lot to say about who that could possibly be. Let me just give you one short quote from that Trumpet issue. When you study these scriptures, this is my father writing, when you study these scriptures alongside current events revealing modern Moscow's imperialist direction, you see that Vladimir Putin could well become the leader of that gigantic army of the East. We'll talk more about that again after the break. This gigantic army that's mentioned in Bible prophecy over in Revelation chapter 9. There's going to be someone presiding over it, someone heading it up. And that's what makes this forming alliance between Russia and China so significant. Historically, these two have gone against each other. But now they're coming together. Now they're joining together, and that is significant from a prophetic standpoint. Here's something from the New York Post, May 14th, 2015. Supposedly isolated, Russia's bromance with China flourishes. No wonder both countries appreciate power politics and scoff at America's display of global weakness. That's what a lot of analysts in the United States think, in the administration in Washington, that, Russia's isolated. I'm sure a lot of analysts here in Europe think the same thing. Russia's isolating itself. Meanwhile, it's joining together with China, and China just happens to have 1.3 billion people. So much for isolation. That area of the world represents 2-3 billion people. Russia is not isolated. There may be a lot of nations in Europe, certainly the United States, that definitely don't like what Russia is doing right now. But Russia is reaching out to its neighbors in the East. In the East. This article continues, while President Obama fights with Democrats on the Hill over a trade deal with our Pacific allies, Putin makes a reality of his own pivot to Asia. Our pivot remains imaginary. This is, again, a U.S. journalist writing. While we lose friends in the Mideast and Asia, isolated Putin, he has isolated there in quotes, as you can see, isolated Putin gains allies everywhere. And no, this new Sino-Russian love affair isn't good news. Increasingly, repressive Russia and undemocratic China won't spread democracy. They'll do the opposite. They won't open their markets, except to each other. Their budding alliance combined with America's absence is bad news for the free world. Now look, that's just reality. We're not trying to scare anyone in this program, but that's just the world today. They're not going to be looking to spread democracy, to spread liberty and freedom. This represents a great challenge to the West. And that's why this booklet is so crucial, because you need to understand the significance of it from a Bible prophecy perspective. It's a wonderful little booklet, as I say, just in reviewing it myself a few weeks ago. Powerful, powerful message. You need it. You need to go through it for yourself. Look at this piece. This is the Washington Times. On this same Russia-China alliance, adversaries during the long Cold War, Beijing and Moscow have increasingly found common cause in challenging the U.S. and Western-dominated order in Europe and Asia, finding ways, both symbolic and concrete, to challenge what they see as Washington's efforts to contain their rise. See the same kinds of warnings coming out from a variety of sources. This is significant. That particular article goes on and talks about all of the signals that they've been sending. Even just this past year, Russia working together with China on a deal involving commercial aircraft. They had the joint exercises, I believe, in the month of May. Russia is a big supporter of that Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank that China is hoping to establish to counter America's influence, the American dollar's dominance. Russia's all for that. Look at this quote, one last quote from that same piece. The warming may prove more significant because neither side has other obvious major allies as they seek to expand their clout and challenge the U.S.-designed global order in Asia and Europe. Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi, he added, have the incentive, clout, and job security to move an alliance forward. They have the clout, they have the power, they have the job security to move it forward. Now, the question is this massive alliance, and it is massive, is it significant from the standpoint of Bible prophecy? Well, as this booklet, you can clearly see it just from the title alone. It is significant. Russia and China in prophecy. Stay tuned so you can get the information you need to request your free copy. We'll be right back.
America's status as the world's lone superpower is rapidly fading. Other nations and groups of nations are angling to fill the void. Rising in the East is an emerging power block of tremendous potential in manpower, economic heft, and military might. Its growing presence is intensifying global competition for resources and for geopolitical influence. Where will this trend lead? What does this mean for you? Biblical prophecy provides a remarkable, penetrating preview of Asia's future. Request a free copy of Russia and China in Prophecy. This book exposes in startling detail what Russia and China are doing and will do, and how they will affect your life. Also, you'll be sent a free one-year subscription to The Trumpet magazine. The Trumpet looks at today's headlines through the clear light of Bible prophecy. The Trumpet will keep you up to date on the continuing rise of the powers in the East by taking a hard look at today's news and comparing it to the prophecies of the Bible. The Trumpet magazine is this world's most informed news magazine. To learn more, request a free copy of Russia and China in Prophecy. So act today and follow the information on your screen.
As I was saying there before the break, we know all about China's ability to, really Russia too, because over the last year and a half, the United States has sustained 3 major cyber attacks, 2 of them coming from China, 1 of them from Russia, where top U.S. officials have had their private emails compromised. And then this latest one with the Chinese cyber attack. About 18 million federal employees, current and past employees, have had their private information stolen. Stolen. It's like Cyber Pearl Harbor, several have written. And the U.S. response has been nothing. Nothing has happened. All of this information stolen by the Chinese. Why are they making such great gains in cyber warfare, or with conventional weapons, or projecting their naval power? Russia too, projecting its power, its influence as it pushes into Europe. Let me just give you a quote from National Review, once again, Indefensible Defense. This is a reputable publication in the United States. It says, but underlying the surface chaos that dominates the news cycle are the currents that lead to world war. Those are the currents that we see, that we feel. That's where it's leading. He says, more than anything else, how we approach the strength of the American military, the nuclear calculus, China and Russia, will determine the security, prosperity, honor, and at long range, even the sovereignty and existence of this country. I mean, that's how you project your power in this world. That's just reality. You project, in this evil world, you project power with your military. And these 2 nations, Russia and China, they're in the midst of a massive expansion of military power. Even as we've seen the United States and also here in Britain, the size of the militaries in both these nations, it's been dwindling, as has been reported from a number of sources. This from the Interpreter, June 9th, Putin's pivot, it says there, the Russians are coming to Asia. It says, but the Ukraine crisis and the broader Russia-West tensions that it has stoked obscures the fact that Moscow has been quietly but rapidly reorienting its strategic posture, and it's doing so to the east, not to the west. One final quote there, it says, Russia is betting that the 21st century will be an Asian one, and it's betting on China as the main driver of change in regional and global order. Now let's look over at Revelation chapter 8, and we'll just take you through, again, some of the prophecies of God coming right out of the book of Revelation, the book that God reveals, if we look to Him, if we look to the Bible interpretation. Revelation, it should be a revelation. Too many people want to dismiss it and say, well, it's just mythology, it's got all these symbols, I can't understand it. You can understand it. This booklet will help you. Russia and China in Prophecy. This was the last book written, put into the New Testament. God revealed these truths to His apostle, John. Look at Revelation 18, verse 1. I'll let you read it on the board. It says, and when He had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of a half hour, and I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And so when the 7th seal opens, after that comes 7 trumpet blasts. We're talking about all of the blasts of God that come in that final year of the Great Tribulation, when God begins to intervene and to stop man from bringing destruction over all the earth. This is when God takes His opportunity to finally put an end to the suffering that man brings on himself. The last 3 of those trumpet blasts also are called the 3 woes. Look at verse 13. This is Revelation 8 and verse 13. And I behold and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the 3 angels which are yet to sound. These are the 3 final woes, or the 3 last trumpet blasts, representing 3 major battles. Look at chapter 9, Revelation 9. And we'll just look at verse 1 to begin with. And the fifth angel sounded, so this would be the first woe, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. Now, we don't have time to go over to Daniel 11 and to get some of the other details that are brought out there in the Old Testament. But you can see from Daniel 11, verses 40 through 41, that at the time of the end, when the European beast power pushes its way into the glorious land, the Holy Land, in and around Jerusalem, this is during the Great Tribulation, that as it says there in Daniel 11, later on, verse 44, that tidings out of the east, tidings from the east and out of the north shall trouble that European power. And it's in the Holy Land. Where do you go? If you go from there, if you go east and if you go north, where do you arrive? You arrive in Asia. You arrive, more specifically, you arrive in Russia, north. You arrive in China, east. Tidings out of the east, it disturbs the European power. Here again, we're projecting ahead into the prophesied Great Tribulation, the clashing of these major, major world powers. That's the significance of what's now forming. I haven't even talked much about the forming power in Europe. Perhaps we can discuss that in a later program. Drop down to verse 7 here. It says, and the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And verse 8 says, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates, as it were, breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots, of many horses running to battle. And then verse 10, and they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. Now the language all through here is symbolic. John's writing it in the 90s AD. I mean, he's writing it almost 2,000 years ago. He's receiving this vision from God while on the Isle of Patmos, and this is how he described it, scorpion tails. He saw in this vision modern warfare. He saw warfare with all the modern armaments that we're very familiar with. And he described them to the best of his ability, using the language, using what was visible in his day. And I think he did a pretty good job of it. Now you look at what man is producing today and the kinds of armaments that look like they have scorpion tails and the sounds of chariots and so on and so forth. Look at how destructive man has been throughout his tortured history with war and violence. Look at verse 11. It says, and they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue has his name Apollyon. These two names, the Hebrew word Abaddon, the Greek word Apollyon, they both mean destroyer. In other words, there is a great invisible force behind this destructive army, behind these destructive woes. Verse 12. It says, one woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying, the 6th angel, which had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels, which are bound in the great river Euphrates. So we're coming now to the 6th trumpet blast, this second woe. And this is leading us right up to the return of Jesus Christ. Mr. Armstrong, in his booklet, The Book of Revelation, Unveiled at Last, he said this refers to a tremendous military power, also to the north, due north. World events are now moving rapidly to make possible the creation of a communist Eurasian army of that unbelievable manpower. What unbelievable manpower is he talking about? Well, look at the next verse. This is verse 15. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them. 200 million men. That's the size of this army. And people will look at this and scoff and argue and say, well, this would be impossible to come up with an army this size. But I've already talked to you about how populated that region of the earth is. Not just Russia and China, but others that are going to be drawn into that alliance as well. When you're putting together an army coming from a populated area of about 3 billion people, 200 million men, is very possible. It's not just possible, it's going to happen. That's what your Bible says. We're talking about a massive army like this world has never seen. You read it. It's right there in Revelation 9, verse 16. This Eurasian, or this mainly Asian conglomerate, this Asian army, look at verse 17, continuing. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. Verse 18, but these three was the third part of, by these three was the third part of men killed by fire, smoke, brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails, and their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. Again, it's pretty powerful imagery. And you read through this, you could see why a lot of people do study Revelation and then say, well, I can't understand this. What does all of this mean? It just sounds like mythology or something. But you can understand it. You can know the time period. You can know the great nations involved. You can know about the armaments. You can know about the size of the armies. Verse 20, it says, and the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship demons and idols of gold and silver, brass, stone, and so on. Verse 21 says, neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. I mean, these last couple of verses in the chapter, so revealing. After all this correction, still, you see the hardness, the stubbornness of man, and his refusal to submit to God's authority. I mean, it's also revealing. It reveals a lot about our great God, doesn't it? God is looking to bring us to repentance, that's all, to change our hearts, to turn to Him in humility and meekness, to look to Him for guidance and direction. And you know what? In the end, finally, that will happen. That's the positive ending here. That's the great hope. As we transition from all of this right into the establishment of God's kingdom on earth, finally, there will be peace on this earth. Stay tuned. Make sure you get this little booklet, Russia and China in Prophecy, a valuable, valuable booklet to add to your collection. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time.